Boxing Truth here. I was watching some interesting video on ES News, Ellie Setback's channel. They were talking about all-time great heavyweights. Malik Scott is on record. He says Vitaly Klitschko, the Klitschko brothers, would have trashed all the all-time great heavyweights. Now, I don't usually do a topic like this, but for this I make an exception. I found it an interesting debate, interesting topic. I mean, the Klitschko brothers, could they have trashed all the all-time great heavyweights? Let's look at all the all-time great heavyweights. Let's look at Box Rest lists as a resource. Of course, majority of people will have Ali and Joe Louis as among the top 5, among the top 2. Jack Johnson, Holyfield, Ezra Charles. Some people will have Mike Tyson top 10. Some people will have him top 5. Most people will have him within the top 20. When it comes to Mike Tyson, it's interesting when it comes to him about his ranking among all-time great heavyweights. He definitely is an all-time great heavyweight. Where you put him is really the debate. But I mean, let's look at it. Could the Klitschko brothers trash all the all-time great heavyweights? I mean, could they make easy work of Joe Frazier, Joe Louis, Ali, Jack Johnson? I can't say about Jack Johnson. His time was just, that was a long time ago. The footage of him is not great, very blurry. You really couldn't really see a multitude of his skills with the film that they got of him. But he was great in his own time for a number of reasons, in and outside the ring. But I strongly disagree that Vitaly and Vladimir could have whooped all the all-time great heavyweights. They probably could have beaten some, but they definitely would have taken an L by at least 2 or 3 of the guys on the top 20 list. Now, when it comes to Vitaly, I mean, I respect the Klitschko brothers. They were great in their time. They were great in their era. But the knock on them is that they dominated a weak era. And that's the cold hard truth about it. The era that they were brought up in, which is when Lennox Lewis retired, that was the Klitschko era. When Lennox Lewis retired, they were considered the guys, the men in the division. Vitaly would end up becoming WC champion. He would avenge his brother's loss to Corey Saunders. He would beat Danny Williams, and then he would come back after a 4-year layoff and defend his title a multitude of times. Vladimir, he dominated for a long stretch for all the top contenders, all his mandatories, was willing to fight the young lions of his era, and eventually got beat by a more fleet-footed, very fast, mobile heavyweight that he couldn't catch, that he couldn't lay a glove on, in Tyson Fury. And that's the one guy, that type of style, that would have been the demise of the Klitschko brothers had they had the opportunity to fight all the all-time great heavyweights. Somehow, it was somehow possible to happen. When I watched Vitaly fight, it was very frustrating for me because the opponents just couldn't take advantage of his holes. They couldn't take advantage of his flaws, and that was Vitaly's defense. Vitaly would just fight with his hands down, show absolutely no respect to his opponents, and his opponents just weren't able to capitalize. They wouldn't take advantage because the skill set of the heavyweights that the Klitschko brothers were brought up in, they were very primitive. They didn't have head movement. They didn't have counter-punching ability. They weren't able to cut the distance or get inside on these big guys. And that's why the Klitschko brothers were very dominant. They used their size, they used their distance. Vitaly was really good at placing the range that he wanted to fight in, and was able to land his jab and his really good straight right hand. Would land left hooks to the body, lead left hooks upstairs. He would just pummel you round by round from a distance and not let you get inside. But there were times where his opponents were able to be in that range, but for some reason they wouldn't let their hands go. The guys that he fought just didn't have that talent. They didn't have that skill set. They didn't have the ability to cut the distance and get inside. And that's the difference between the Klitschko era of heavyweights compared to prior generations of heavyweights. The prior generations were more skilled. They were more explosive. They had more tools. They were able to get inside. They were able to move their head. Mike Tyson had the ability to cut the distance. He had the ability to get inside on larger men. He did it a multitude of times. He did it pretty practically his whole career. He was a 5'10.5" heavyweight. And he was the best because he was the most explosive, the most talented, the most skilled. And he was also, at that time, very disciplined, very motivated, and was in the game. He lived, breathed, and slept boxing in the 80s. And that's why he was the very best. People want to criticize his resume, but at the end of the day, he fought Hall of Famers. He beat a pound-for-pound level fighter. He knocked out a legend in Larry Holmes. He fought the top contenders. He fought the Razor Ruddocks, the Tyrell Biggs, the Pinklin Thomases. He fought Evander Holyfield twice. He fought Lennox Lewis. He had some misses in the 90s because that was the only reason, because he was in jail for 3 years. That's why he didn't fight Tommy Morrison. That's why he didn't fight Michael Moore. That's why he didn't fight... he should have fought George Foreman. That fight should have happened. That was his one true miss of his career. The George Foreman fight should have happened. For whatever reason, it didn't. But Mike Tyson, he fought the best of his time. The guys that he needed to fight. In the 80s, that's how he became a global figure. He fought the dominant guys of the 90s, which was Holyfield and Lennox Lewis. But at that time, he was a shell of himself, nowhere near the fighter he once was, and still was able to become a 2-time heavyweight world champion, despite him being nowhere near the fighter he was in his heyday of the 1980s. Now, the one heavyweight that I felt of all time that would have beaten the Klitschko brothers is Ali, of course. I don't think Vitaly or Vladimir would have been able to beat Ali, the Muhammad Ali of his heyday, from 1964 to 1967. That Ali was just untouchable. Mike Tyson of the 1980s was untouchable. That Ali would have played with the Klitschko brothers. Vitaly was too damn slow. Didn't have the footwork, didn't have the timing, didn't have the speed. He wouldn't have been able to lay a glove on that Ali. Ali would have outboxed the shit out of him. He would have did the same thing what Tyson Fury did to Vladimir. But Ali was a better offensive fighter compared to Tyson Fury. Ali probably would have made Vladimir quit. Mike Tyson probably would have knocked Vladimir out in his heyday. Vitaly maybe would have beaten Tyson. Vitaly, I respect Vitaly. He's the tougher of the two brothers. He's more mentally stronger, has a better chin, not as fragile. He was tougher to beat. He was better than his brother overall, even though Vladimir has more accolades, more title defenses, all the other stuff. But those guys, as great as they were in their day, they weren't able to beat the legends of their... I mean, Vitaly didn't beat Lennox Lewis. Vladimir never beat a Hall of Famer. I mean, who he beat? What's his best one? Povetkin? David Haye? Those are his signature wins. And he couldn't beat a prospect in Anthony Joshua. I mean, he schooled him for a number of rounds, but it's in the record books. He lost officially by TKO. Even though I felt Vladimir showed his greatness in this fight, to me it signifies a very weak division. Let me tell you something right now. Joe Louis will knock out a bunch of these big ass bums in the heavyweight division right now. Joe Louis, a 205-pound, in this day and age, a cruiserweight, would trash a bunch of these big ass bombs. The heavyweight division is just nowhere near as talented as it used to be. The athletes are not as good as they used to be. They're not as skilled. They're bigger. They're bigger and stronger, but they're not better fighters. Ali would have toyed with the Klitschko brothers, in my humble opinion. Maybe they could have beaten Joe Louis. Maybe the size was just too much for Joe Louis to overcome. Holyfield would have been a handful for these guys. Maybe Holyfield would have drowned Vladimir. I don't know. I'm not sure about Vitaly. But Vitaly couldn't beat Lennox. He wouldn't have beaten Ali. Maybe he could have beaten Mike Tyson. Maybe he could have beaten Evander Holyfield. Possibly would have beaten Joe Louis. But the Ali of 64 to 67, that dude was untouchable. Nobody would have messed with that Ali. Maybe only Mike Tyson of the 80s would have had a chance. But he would have had to blow him out early to beat him. Because if it went past 4, he would have been drowned he would have been drowned late had it gone past 4. The Ali was too quick, too mobile, had the best footwork for heavyweight, unusual. That hasn't been simulated since, really. Tyson Fury has been the closest to it, and that's why he's still the best heavyweight today. Even though 2 years in exile, it's because he has a unique ability with his movement, his fleet-footedness. It's amazing he can move the way he did at that size, and that's why he's the best heavyweight today, even though he's still in exile. He needs to come back and do his thing one more time to solidify his legacy. But I just wanted to talk about this all-time great heavyweight thing. Vitaly, he was too slow for Ali. Very defensively flawed as well, and the guys that he fought just couldn't take advantage of his holes. He couldn't, they couldn't take, I mean, you needed one simple thing against Vitaly, and that was an authoritative jab, and the number of guys he fought didn't have that. He was so wide open for it. You can feint with it, the lead right hands, the counters. After Vitaly punches, I mean, Vitaly had a lot of holes. It's just the guys that he fought just couldn't capitalize. But the Klitschko brothers were great in their time, but they were in an era that was very weak, where the skill set of a lot of the fighters are very primitive. There's just not a lot of great talent in the heavyweight division, and you see that in today's heavyweight division. Rick and Wilder would have been bum status in the previous generations. Wouldn't even get past fringe contenders as a fringe contender in the earlier days, the 80s, the early 90s. They were just more talented fighters. They were better fighters. But y'all let me know what y'all think. Are the Klitschko brothers that badass? Could they have whooped every all-time great heavyweight? Y'all let me know what y'all think. This is Boxing Truth. I'm out.